Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein. As always, I'm so happy to be here with you. It is a chilly but beautiful snowy day in the Northeast. And if you see this episode on YouTube, you will see that I've kind of switched around my studio so that you can see the nice snowy backdrop behind me. But either way, today I'm going to invite you to use your imagination, really engage it, because I'm going to be talking about not only a really common issue, procrastination, but also a number of reasons why we do it and how to snap out of it, right? That's the most important part. The actual tips and tools to get out of our own way. The more you engage your imagination, very powerful tool, and envision yourself going through steps to beat the procrastination habit, and get out of your own way, get the things done that the healthiest part of you really wants to. Well, the more you use your imagination, the more potent this approach will be, right? The more likely it is that you will be effective. Because remember, the tools we're talking about on this podcast largely are ones in our minds, and procrastination is something that we create the need for it in our minds. So before I get into the reasons why people procrastinate, what I wanted to just say is that this is not a podcast about judgment. It's just not. Because everything we do, whether we think of it as healthy or unhealthy, adaptive or maladaptive, we do things that our minds believe have good reasons and good uses for us. So everything we do, whether it's smoking or overeating or procrastinating or overspending or whatever, those behaviors serve usually more than one purpose. A lot of times it's a purpose we may not be consciously aware of at the time. But as we grow, you know this, we choose better tools, we learn more skills, we have more information. And so we're able to retire. I'm using hypnotic language here, and some of you may be well aware of that already, but if not, I'm just letting you know. We can retire old tools that had a place at one time, but may not have a place now because we've better tools. So that's going to be the focus of how we talk about procrastination today. But again, it's the new year. It's a perfect time to talk about this because many people, maybe you as well, I certainly do, we set goals in the beginning of the new year. I know I talked about this in a recent episode. I talked about tools for getting things done and getting unstuck. One of them was purposeful procrastination, but that is different from what I'm talking about in terms of the challenge of procrastination. Right? So procrastination, very simply, is when we put something off. We put off starting a task. We put off continuing to work toward it. But it's a task that we have consciously agreed to take on. Now, this is very different, as I mentioned in the last episode. It's different from choosing to start a project later because there's adequate time to do that. Or maybe we put off something because the benefits of putting off the task outweigh the pluses of starting it now. Maybe you're prioritizing and there's another sort of task that needs to be done beforehand. That's a very different thing from just having something you have to get done for whatever reason you've agreed to take it on, right? And maybe it's something that you're passionate about, or maybe it's just something you promised somebody else you would do. And we'll get into what the difference is between those things in a few moments. But procrastination is putting it off, even if you said, well, I'm going to get to it today. Maybe you've even written it into your calendar on your to-do list for the week, or you've blocked out time. It's helpful to do that. But sometimes we do that and then we still don't get to it. And I've been there. Just so you know, I am someone who is wired to be a world-class procrastinator. And if you're somebody who tends to overthink things, either how it's going to go or what other people will think of you or what's the quote best way to do it, or you take on too many projects. Maybe you're everybody's helper. That's a whole other podcast episode in and of itself. But it's easy to then say, oh my God, why did I take this on? Or to have conflicted feelings about something. The purposeful procrastination is, I think, a much more masterful approach. And the reason for that is that it doesn't even have to be a big task, but like if you're having friends over for dinner in 3 weeks and you know you want to make a certain salad, you should not buy those vegetables today. It might seem on paper like it would save you time. It wouldn't. You'd be wasting your effort. And knowing that and prioritizing something else instead for now, or scheduling something for later when it's appropriate, that is very purposeful. That's a good thing to do. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll be not only clearer on that, but better at that. I also want to just get this out of the way. It's not a moral failing if you procrastinate. I don't think procrastination is related to people's morals. I don't think it's related to how great a person they are. I don't think it's related to how smart they are, or even their ability to complete a task. I've seen a lot of super smart people put things off to the point that it actually jeopardizes their well-being, but they feel paralyzed. The more time goes by and the more anxiety mounts close in time to when something is due, they find it even harder to get things done, right? And if that's you, again, you're not alone. I've been there. I get it. We're in this together. So you already have a sense of some of the reasons why we procrastinate, right? Sometimes we think we're putting something off just temporarily. Sometimes things, life gets in the way. Maybe you woke up with a cold. That's not procrastination. That's feeling like I can't really do it now, but I still intend to do something. Sometimes a task is boring, or you have some other unpleasant feelings associated with the task. There could be a million reasons for that. You've probably also noticed if you tend to procrastinate that if you have anxiety about a task, in the beginning, when you start to put it off, I'll do it later, I'll take care of it tonight, I'll take care of it this week, this weekend, tomorrow, this month, before it's due, whatever you're telling yourself, in the short term, that alleviates anxiety. So remember when I said in the beginning that every behavior we have is a type of tool. There's a part of you that wants to feel less anxious about a task, if that's what the task evokes in you. It may or it may not. Putting it off for a little bit, it makes you feel better. It does. It is very reinforcing. The problem is, the closer you get to the deadline, the more the anxiety starts to actually amp up. Now, for some people, they'll notice that when the anxiety hits a critical point, they somehow get out of their own way and they just get it done. It's this weird kind of experience. Many of you may know what I'm talking about, or your kids may know what I'm talking about, where it's like the example of the paper that's due, and it just feels like an enormous, overwhelming task. Maybe it's a 50-page paper, I don't know, or a 20-page paper, and you're a student in school, right? And most people can remember this, even if it's been a while. Or maybe it's something similar due for your job. And then now it's due tomorrow. And maybe you've kind of half put some effort into it here and there. And now it's like the alarm bells are going off and it's really overwhelming, but there's a sweet spot almost. That's almost not the best term, but where you will get it done and get out of your own way, because now you're not worried about perfect. You're more worried about not finishing. And it's almost like being in an altered state, right? You just crank it out and get it done. However, if the anxiety becomes too great, it is just paralyzing. And that's when you're calling in sick the next day to work because maybe you didn't finish it or the project is not in great shape. And you're embarrassed, right? And actually, those types of outcomes are probably and kind of ironically, part of what fuels procrastination for a lot of people. They're afraid it won't go well, and then they don't do it till the last minute, and it doesn't go well. So it's a very self-fulfilling prophecy. So they had a period of time where they didn't have as much anxiety, but then ultimately the anxiety about that task is much greater than it really needed to be, right? So that's one reason, anxiety, long-winded way of saying that. Relatedly, another reason why we procrastinate, I have 8 of them here, 8 common reasons, but another one is we don't like an aspect of the task. So whether you're a student and you signed up for a class and there's an assignment that you're dreading, there's something you don't like about it. It's boring, or you hate writing papers, or, again, it's something at work. Maybe it's a group project and maybe you don't like working in a group. Maybe it's cleaning your home or organizing something or doing your taxes. There's so many things, right, that we all procrastinate about. Maybe it's that you've signed up for a gym membership, but it's like, it's hard to go to the gym when you feel out of shape, right? But you're not going to get in shape unless you start going consistently. So it's the beginning part that can feel like the hardest part. And often that's part of why we put things off. So not liking an aspect of the task at hand, anxiety, we talked about those. Another one, number 3, worrying that you'll fail. Number 3 out of the reasons why we procrastinate. You're worried that you're just going to not succeed. Maybe it's a yes or no type of thing. You succeed or you fail. Or maybe it's just that you're afraid you're going to do a bad job. And of all the things that are kind of attached to that, what people will think, what you'll think, what your inner critic's going to say, right? Number 4, this might surprise some people, but it's worrying that you're going to succeed. Now, that might sound really strange, but we're complex beings, right? We live in relationships and in communities and so forth. So you might be conflicted about achieving a goal because someone else will have a feeling about it. And then you will worry about how they will react or treat you. Now, this could be something you have absolutely no conscious awareness of. And if somebody said it to you, your therapist or whatever, maybe you'd be like, that's BS. Of course, I want to achieve, success at my job. Of course, I want a promotion. Of course, I want a raise. But unconsciously, this is just a classic example, but it's a classic example because it's not uncommon. Maybe your parents did not achieve what they wanted to, professionally or otherwise. And maybe there's a part of you that unconsciously or not fully consciously is worried about making them feel worse about not achieving something. Or maybe your friend or your partner, same type of thing. And maybe you're worried that they'll be upset with you or be envious of you and it'll hurt the relationship. We're all human beings and we have all kinds of feelings, all of us. And sometimes they're not ones that we would be proud of or want to admit that we have, right? But we may not want another person to feel bad about where they are or feel frustrated with us for getting out of the shared kind of comfort zone of staying kind of in the same place. We might feel undeserving of success, right? Or we might believe, again, success will endanger a relationship that we have. Now think about it. If you've ever accomplished something at work and, had a colleague make a snarky comment or a friend or insinuate that you didn't deserve to do well, it's such an unpleasant feeling. And some people will be like, good, that's their issue, right? But a lot of people are just very invested in trying to make sure everybody feels okay. And if that's an issue for you, it might be getting in the way, even with a health behavior change. So many years ago, somebody came to see me, not the only person who came to see me about smoking cessation, but this person stands out in my mind because consciously, they really wanted to quit smoking. That was a very sincere goal, and they had quit many times successfully, but then it never lasted. And I knew this person had the physiological ability to quit, even though they had been a multiple pack a day smoker. It's usually a lot harder for people like that to stop smoking because they're getting so much nicotine and so forth, and the habit is so deeply entrenched. It's very hard to go from 30 or 40 cigarettes a day or more to zero. But this person had done that multiple times. And when I was speaking with them, it became clear that they had a lot of guilt out of being healthy despite this habit. And without going into detail, they had a sibling and a parent who were both, in this person's mind, much better people and more deserving of health. But there was a family illness that both of these relatives had, and they died. So only semi-consciously, the person who had quit successfully couldn't stay quit, and sometimes had put off trying to quit again because they felt guilty that the, quote, better person, their sibling and their parent, had passed away and actually had never smoked. So this person didn't feel deserving of good health. And that's why they had a hard time starting this again and had a hard time maintaining it. Remember, procrastination, it's not just not starting something. I mean, sometimes we start projects 1,000 times, but we don't finish them. So worrying you will succeed because it will impact somebody else or because you don't feel deserving, a significant reason. Okay, number 5, lacking confidence. So if you think that you cannot do something, you don't feel like it's possible for you, it'll be too hard, you won't do it. I'm going to tell you a little anecdote about this where you can do things that you think weren't possible. So I had a very dear friend who since passed away, but I remember this person saying that a million years ago, another mutual friend had run a marathon. And I remember this friend saying, well, that's not an achievement. That's not that great a thing. It's not like a professional accomplishment or whatever. But for most people, that would be an enormous accomplishment. So fast forward years later, this person had run not only 1, but 3 marathons while battling stage 4 cancer. Like unbelievable accomplishment to me. But hard to start training, especially for, having the good reason that A, you're not a natural runner, and he wasn't, and B, because you've disparaged this goal. He never said that, but I always wondered if that played a little bit of a part. And C, it felt really physically overwhelming, right? It would be reasonable for him to have thought, I don't know if I can do this. 26 miles, 26 miles, most of us would find daunting and say, I can't do it. I'm going to tell you personally, I don't believe that it would be that easy for me to do that. I'm not embarking on training for a marathon. But having the converse of that is having confidence or enough motivation can make us do all kinds of incredible things. And what I'm hoping you take from the story of my dear friend is that a non-runner, not in the best shape of his life and dealing with stage 4 cancer, was somehow able to put one foot in front of the other, ultimately, and go from running no miles to running 26.2. So I hope that that's inspiring. Most of the time, though, when we don't feel confident about something, we put it off because we feel like even if we tried, it wouldn't work. That's not, it might not even be true that we can't do it. And that's what I want to have you take from that. So that was number 5, lacking confidence. Number 6, difficulty with concentration and focus. Now that's a lot of us. And in the, I don't want to say post-pandemic era, because we have multiple airborne illnesses that are extremely prevalent right now, especially in the winter. COVID, RSV, the flu, other things. So unfortunately, the after effects of those things, and we're having more data come out every day showing this, is that they're inflammatory. A lot of us are having trouble with concentration and focus that go beyond wherever we were before. Our brains are vulnerable to inflammation just like the rest of us. Some of us are just born with less of an easy time focusing on something. And when a task requires focus, or it's a little tedious, or both, it is that much harder to sustain focus and concentration on getting it done. So you might notice this more with tasks that are like academic tasks or work tasks. Again, writing a paper is a great example, but it could be, balancing your checkbook, doing your taxes. It could be organizing something that you need to organize, staying focused. We'll talk about some things you can do to improve your focus. Everybody's brain works differently, by the way. So even if you are not average in terms of your ability to focus, that's okay, because that's something we can strengthen, right? And we all kind of tend to find our workarounds and ways to compensate. When we get into the exercise at the end of this episode, you'll be able to actually ask your very successful future self what you can do to make completing your task easier. Okay. So number 7 is having a hard time breaking the larger goal down into smaller, discrete tasks. Now, it might mean that in and of itself feels overwhelming, or it might feel like something you haven't even considered because the task just seems so overwhelming that you haven't yet thought about how to break it down. But doing that serves a few purposes. So if I were to use the marathon example, and you're a non-runner and you want to run a marathon for whatever reason, it requires putting one foot in front of the other. The first day, maybe you're going to run a block. Maybe it's not even going to be a mile. And that's okay. And maybe this second week, you're going to be running 2 city blocks or 3 city blocks. And the point of it is, well, twofold. One is that you can see something coming to a logical completion when you break it down in your mind into discrete parts. It's kind of like a recipe. You have all these ingredients on your counter and you want to make a cake. Even if it's the first time you've ever made a cake, if you have a recipe, you know how to measure things out, what order you want to combine them in, even the speed you're going to put your mixer on, and when you're going to ultimately take that beautifully combined batter, pour it into a pan, and put it into the oven for a specific amount of time, right? A lot of life is like that. It's just having a set idea of what the ingredients are and the steps you need to take to create the finished product you want. Yeah. Breaking a goal into smaller, discrete parts makes it a lot easier. If you're going to run that marathon, once you've learned to run a mile, 2 miles, 6 miles, if you've never run a mile before, the goal seems much more doable. The reason for that partly is because all along the way, it's not one goal anymore. Now it's just a series of goals leading to a larger one. But your brain loves to be rewarded by success. So every time you're able to check something new off and say, I did it, your brain lights up as if you just got any other type of reward. And it makes you more eager to accomplish the next thing, rather than dreading the whole thing as this big, undoable blob, this big kind of undifferentiated task that it's, I do it or I don't do it, right? It's achievable steps, and you feel good about completing each one. So, number 8, believing you will have to work all of the time in order to finish something. When goals feel overwhelming, they feel, when I was saying this big blob, this big giant thing, that's kind of what I mean. It just takes on this overwhelming life of its own. The idea of the goal, right? So it seems like something that is undoable. But it's something that the emotion and the fear and the anxiety and the hopelessness around it, that's the blob for me. I don't know if this is making any sense to people who aren't inside my mind right now seeing this, but I'm seeing like this big gelatinous blob of, oh no, in my mind. A lot of times big goals feel like that. They feel like a monster that takes on a life of its own, and one where we just need to hide from it. And they seem bigger, and the tasks seem more burdensome or onerous than it would actually be just to get it done. So by the time we start it or half start it, it feels like we've already been defeated. So reframing the goal is going to be important. Just putting it in a realistic context. Almost nothing for most people will require working day and night all of the time in order to finish it. There's probably something out there, but for most of us, you know what? Getting in shape is not that kind of goal. Quitting smoking is not that kind of goal. Writing a book, right? Or writing music, or cleaning and organizing our homes, doing work on the outside of our house, volunteering for something, studying for an exam. None of that is going to take all of your time. It really won't. And what's so interesting to me is that the more we kind of get over the initial kind of hump, you probably noticed that once you can run 3 miles, if you've ever started running 4 miles is a lot less of a big deal because you've already got more skill, you're just stronger, you've got more under your belt, you're more confident, right? Just getting over that hump. So, as I mentioned, there are a variety of things we can do, and let's talk about some of those. So, number 1 is reconnecting to your goal. Because chances are, if it's a goal that you have picked, there was some emotional reason for you deciding you wanted to take this on. Now, of course, sometimes it's a little bit different. Like, say you are somebody and you want to get a college degree, or you want to finish high school. So the exam or the paper that feels overwhelming, you maybe never would have chosen that particular exam or paper or project. Or maybe it's something at work, but maybe the larger goal is something that's important to you, right? Finishing high school, or finishing college, or achieving a milestone at work. Or a lot of people do CrossFit and other things nowadays. It's like, okay, you might hate doing burpees, but maybe you like the idea of winning a larger challenge or just completing it. So reconnect to whatever it is that helped you to feel motivated to take on the goal, right? Or agree to the goal. If we use the example of weight loss, again, because it's one of the most common New Year's resolutions, why do you want to lose the weight? What made you want to do this in the first place? And you probably have a lot of reasons. I think the reasons are most motivating when we frame them in the positive rather than the negative. And I'm going to give you an example. I want to be healthy and have more energy. Lovely positive goal. Lovely way of positively framing your connection to the goal, rather. Or maybe it's something like, I want to be able to dance at my children's weddings, right? So I want to be healthy. That's, for most people, a more motivating way to think about something versus because I hate my body right now, right? And I can't love my body until I, lose weight or get to a certain size or firm up or whatever. And I want you to think about this analogy if you don't believe me. If you were trying to grow a plant and, maybe you wanted to plant a little vegetable garden, right? You'd put good soil in, I hope, water it, take care of it, nurture it. I hope you'd be excited to see your seedlings emerge from the earth if you started from seed, or just see your plants thrive and grow, right? That's very positive. You're picturing all of the great things, how gratifying it will be when you have this beautiful garden emerge, or maybe it's just the idea of making your own food or whatever. That is so different from pouring vinegar on plants that you're trying to grow, right? And burning them, telling them, you better grow because I hate you because you haven't grown yet. Hey, listen to how that sounds. Well, it's the same thing with regard to our own self-talk. So connecting with our inner ally, right? The part of us that really wants to do these things is important. That's the part that's going to encourage you and say, listen, you did it. You ran a whole block. Good for you. Who cares if it's not a marathon yet? That's not the point. Remembering why you agreed to the goal can help you negotiate with the part of you that feels like giving up when you have those feelings, and they're normal. I just want to validate that. All right. Number 2, in terms of how we can beat the procrastination habit and get things done, analyze the chain of the thoughts, the feelings, and the behaviors that lead to you getting off task. So again, using the weight loss example, when I think of going to the gym, that's the thought. I worry about being the most out of shape person there. And that's the feeling, right? So I'm thinking of going to the gym. I can see myself going, and now it's triggering a fear and a worry about being the most out of shape person there. That makes me feel anxious and hopeless. And then I find other, quote, legitimate activities to distract me. Maybe it's like doing chores or eating something sweet to distract from the distress. So that's an example of a chain of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And I'm sure that, if you pay attention, you can notice how often we have this kind of runaway train, the thought of something, whether or not it's even true, or whether or not it's likely. And then all these distressing feelings, and we try and escape the feelings and the thoughts by distracting or avoiding. And you can take what you learn. I would actually journal about these things and reframe that sequence of thought, feeling, behavior. Write it down, because that's going to be a guide. It's going to provide an alternative, a healthier alternative that is more likely to support your success. So a healthier alternative to the chain of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors I just mentioned would be when I get anxious about going to the gym and I start to crave sweets, I'm going to make a deal with myself to breathe for a few minutes, to calm down. And then I'm going to go to the gym anyway, even if it's only for 5 minutes, right? So it gives you an alternative way of interpreting what you're thinking and what you're feeling. It gives you an alternative behavior to manage those feelings and calm down. And then a promise to go at least do something toward your goal. And by the way, if you're going to go to the gym, walk to the gym, bike to the gym, drive to the gym, you're probably going to stay for longer than 5 minutes. But even if you don't, it's still something. It's still better than not going. All of that helps decrease our anxiety and our hopelessness. Changing that chain can lead to success, so keep that in mind. So number 3, break the larger goal into smaller, achievable tasks. We already talked about that. So it does make goals less daunting. It makes them more doable. It reduces anxiety. As I mentioned before, it provides multiple opportunities for smaller successes. They still count. Every triumph that you have, by the way, every goal, every step toward a goal, mini goal that you check off, leads to something called greater self-efficacy. And self-efficacy means I believe that I can do the things I need and want to do, right? That's how we achieve our goals. So number 4, visualize yourself moving along points on a timeline toward the completed goal and see yourself as successful. Now, as you know, I have over a dozen, I think, audio programs with Hay House. 2 of them have been especially popular, 3, especially this time of year. One is on freeing yourself from procrastination, and it uses a lot of the techniques that I'm talking about, but in terms of putting them in a framework of hypnotic imagery, mental rehearsal, and so forth. But we'll have a little mini kind of series of tips at the end of this episode. But that's one, freeing yourself from procrastination. Another one is creating positive change. So that's another one that's helpful for getting your goals done. And the other one I think is helpful, and what I like is that you can use it during sleep, is manifesting your future self during deep sleep. So again, they're all on Hay House, hayhouse.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. But you don't have to use those. You can do this on your own. You can create your own imagery. I'll give you some tips in a moment. But visualizing yourself moving along points on a timeline toward your goal and seeing yourself as successful does a lot more than you would think. It's so simple, but it's so powerful. Because remember, all of the procrastination is created by our minds. All of the reasons for putting things off, that's all coming from movies in our minds that trigger our emotions and impact our behaviors. So changing that movie in the mind, extremely worthwhile. One of the best investments of your time that you can do. And again, I'll go over a few steps for doing so on your own in a moment. So number 5, you've heard me say practice mindfulness about 1,000,001 times, but it's invaluable. It is essential, especially for those of us, myself included, by the way, who have a hard time focusing or concentrating, who find it easy to get distracted, who find it easy to get overwhelmed by how am I going to get this done? Mindfulness. I have an audio program on mindfulness because of course I do, but you can find, again, thousands of mindfulness meditations online, many of them low cost, some of them free. You can do this on your own in a very simple and easy way. You can, if you're in therapy, you can ask your therapist for help with that. But it's one of the most useful and cost-effective things that you can do, honestly, to improve your life. You'll feel better, you'll do better, you'll live better, truly. And it'll help free you from a lot of the anxiety and self-doubt that crops up around procrastination. Okay. Number 6, train your brain to improve your focus and resist distractions. So mindfulness, again, that's going to help with that. It does engage the frontal and prefrontal areas of your brain and helps you to practice staying focused on things. It helps you to turn down the volume on distress. Research has shown that mindfulness also helps with, it leads to increased thickness in these brain areas, indicating a real measurable change. But if meditation is not your thing, get exercise, pay attention to that. Go for a walk, pay attention to your feet as they make connection with the sidewalk or the earth. If you play a musical instrument, really attend thoughtfully, move your awareness to the music and the movements of your fingers as you play guitar or piano or whatever, right? If you do yoga, perfect way to practice focused attention. Household chores, washing dishes, feel the water on your hands, smell the dish detergent, Notice the little soap bubbles that kind of float up as you're washing the dishes. Listen to the sound of the sponge making contact with the ceramic of your plates. So mindfulness does not have to be seated meditation and breath awareness. It often is. But if you practice that whenever you're doing anything in your daily life, you'll find that it gets easier and easier to pay attention in general. Okay, so now let's talk about some self-hypnosis techniques for getting things done. Again, you can do this completely on your own at home. The more you practice it, the better it will work for you. So I would say get an old school notebook or journal, because writing things down is going to be part of this process. Get a pen that you like. For some reason, I like these gel pens, these like medium black ink rollerball gel pens. It makes it more enjoyable to write. You can go on Amazon or to your local stationery store or, drugstore and get an inexpensive notebook, maybe one with an interesting cover, but get something that makes you feel a little bit more inspired to use it. And then what I would say is set aside time. If you could set aside 20 minutes, half an hour, great. If you can only set aside 5 or 10 minutes, fine. But please find it. It's probably easier early in the day or just before going to bed, but you know what works for you. But shut the ringer on your phone. Number one, just focus on your breath for a few moments. Or again, it could be just the feeling of one hand in another, the feeling of your body sitting in your chair, whatever it is. Take something to focus on and just allow that focus to help you get more relaxed. The breath is really your body's natural mechanism for this. So that's why I always suggest that. But just observing, you don't need to change it. Your focus doesn't have to be laser-like. It can just be like you're noticing, a person walking down the street. That's how your attention can be on your breath, or noticing a cloud drifting across the sky. Number two, write down the goal that you want to achieve. Write down the reasons for your goal. So I guess that's 2A and 2B, right? Write down the goal. What is it you want to get done? And number 2B, write down the reasons. What's your why? What's your motivation? And you might have 10 things and you might have one thing, right? If you want to quit smoking because you want to dance at your kids' weddings, terrific, excellent reason. If you want to quit smoking because it's costing you a ton of money, great. If you're tired of your clothes smelling like smoke, another reason. You'll notice that some of your reasons are things that you want to move toward or bring into being, right? So like dancing at your kid's wedding, or, being healthier and having more energy, or sleeping better. Some of those will be things that you want to move away from. You want to reduce your risk of certain illnesses, or you want to spend less money on cigarettes or whatever. Just an example. You write down the reasons that work for you. The smoking example is just an example. Okay. Number 3, write down the things that tend to get in the way for you. And the more mindfully you move through your daily life, just paying attention, just noticing things as you notice them. Again, you don't have to have a laser-like focus on everything going on inside and outside of you, but as you notice things in your inner and outer life and you're more present, you may become aware of some things you hadn't thought about. Again, think of my patient who felt guilty about the idea of being healthy because the quote good sibling had passed away and had not smoked, right? So it can be a reason that surprises you. And the more mindful you are generally, the more you'll notice those things too. Or it may be a reason that's super obvious to you. I find writing a paper for school to be boring. I find it to be tedious. or it feels harder to me than other things. It could be anything. Just notice what comes up, what gets in the way. And whether it's one thing or 25 things, just write it down. Number 4, now use your mind to move forward in time to having already achieved your goal. Now, that may be harder for some people than others. That might be harder to imagine, especially if you've not yet achieved that goal or a similar one. For some people, it would be easier because they'll feel like, hey, when I achieve this goal, or if only I could achieve this goal, my life would be better in such and such a way. So use the power of your imagination to try to envision with all of your senses yourself having achieved the goal. And you could even pick a point in time when it feels like that would be easier for you. Now, if you find that you are having a really hard time imagining yourself achieving this goal, having it done already, what I would like you to do is even imagine an alternate version of yourself, the self that could do this. What would be different about that self? So if it's a marathon, just to use that example, and you're not in the best shape of your life just yet, imagine the version of you. It can be an alternate reality version of you. It doesn't matter. It could be that you're channeling somebody that you know or some famous person that you think could achieve that goal pretty easily. So allow your mind to just notice, what does that version of you look like? How do they carry themselves? What are they wearing? Who do they spend time with? What kind of thoughts do they have? How do they feel in their body? How do they feel emotionally? Write that down. And it might be easier to start with writing it down, what you imagine, and maybe the visualization will get better and better over time. That's often what happens. So marathon you, and again, just as an example, or the you that gets in shape might find that your clothes fit better. Or perhaps you buy yourself an item of clothing that makes you feel especially great in it. Or maybe you notice that in addition to achieving that goal, you've also achieved other goals. Who knows? Or the people around you maybe are like, way to go, you did it. I'm so proud of you. Maybe that's what you are telling yourself because you deserve it, right? Again, over time, as you do this exercise, all of these things will become clearer, easier to do, more vivid, and you'll probably notice things that you might not yet be noticing. So notice anything else that's changed in your life from achieving your goal. That's number 5. Notice if any doors have opened for you because you've achieved that goal. Now, it might be something directly related. It might be something that just happens to happen because you're in a better place. Now, number 6, ask your future self for advice. Remember, in the mind, all things are possible. And again, procrastination only happens because something in your mind tells you you can't do it, right? Something in your mind, or maybe several things in your mind, have created a movie that has made your goal seem harder to do, less likely that you can do it, or aversive in some way. So remember, the flip side of that is also possible. You can have a movie in your mind where that very successful future self is available to you, is willing and able to share their wisdom, what they've learned, what helped them be successful, and they want to help you. That's your inner ally. It's a perfect inner ally, by the way. So ask your future self for advice. What would make the goal easier? What do you need to keep in mind? And as you notice anything, write it down. And that actually relates to number 7. Write down whatever you've noticed, even if there are things that popped up that aren't in this list. And then practice doing this exercise every day. Just commit to doing it. Maybe you do it every day for a month. Just notice what you need to keep in mind and notice how all of these images and all of these insights continue to evolve. And what you'll probably find is that at the end of even a week of doing this, your attitude toward the goal and toward yourself completing the goal will have shifted somewhat. You will have more insight into not only what gets in the way, but what would make it easier. You might even have a new perspective on some of the barriers, right? So if you're worried about how somebody else will feel if you're successful and you're worried that they will be unhappy about it, maybe you'll have more insight about that. And maybe you'll be able to send love to that person or those people and still keep focused on your goal. You can send them love and wish them all the best and focus on doing something that's important to you. So pay attention to any shifts that you have, write them down. And then number 8, when you've actually achieved your goal, write down what you've noticed, everything. Maybe one of the thoughts you're going to have is, oh, it's no big deal, in the best possible way. Like, yay, it's a big deal and it's wonderful that you accomplished it, but it wasn't as big a deal to get there. And what a wonderful thing that is. Or maybe you'll have the thought, this was even easier than I thought. Just notice what you notice. It's a great habit to get into doing this exercise because you can do it for as many goals as you want. You'll learn a lot about yourself in the best possible way. Last thing I want you to keep in mind is that getting things done is kind of like developing a muscle. Again, if you're new to weight training or any kind of exercise or whatever, it's a perfect metaphor, right? Because at first things feel hard and then you get stronger, you get faster, you get more flexible. Things become easier so that any related task also becomes easier. I want you to keep in mind that we are all always growing, and that's a good thing. While we're here, we should be growing and learning. So be kind to yourself, be kind to others, embrace what is already wonderful about you in this very moment. And please be your own best friend and inner ally as you work toward goals and just in general. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Unpacking Possibility. If you enjoy the episode, please do remember to like, share, follow, leave me a comment, tell a friend. It really helps me continue bringing more helpful and enjoyable content to you. And of course, as always, until next time, be well.